Welcome to Journey to Daybreak. I'm Rita Golden. Today's program is a continuation of the program from last week, in which our topic was waiting in silence. Plato once wrote, "A wise person speaks because he or she has something to say. A fool speaks because he or she has to say something." How often do we speak because we just have to say something? Because we're just not comfortable with silence? Mother Teresa was known as a friend of silence. As author Carrie Weber writes about Mother Teresa, the reason silence was so important to her is because it offers us the opportunity to begin shedding false understandings of ourselves and the world. It clears a space for the recognition that converts. Silence and prayer become the wombs in which we're reborn. They enlarge the heart because it is capable of containing God's gift of Himself. Here's a bit more about silence from Mother Teresa. If your heart is full of worldly things, you cannot hear the voice of God. But when you have listened to His voice in the silence of your heart, then your heart is filled with His voice. I would like to read something from Psalm 62 and 46. God alone my soul waits in silence, for my hope is from Him. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my deliverance and my honor. My mighty rock, my refuge is in God. Trust in Him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. Be still and know that I am God. Now, the Reverend Dr. Martha Toney will continue to give us more insights on waiting in silence. Dr. Toney.
Greetings, this is Dr. Martha Toney. Thank you for joining us today on Journey to Daybreak. I'd like to invite you to check out my recent book called Journey to Daybreak. You can find it on Amazon Books or at my website, marthatoney.com. I always say the last name is Toney, marthatoney.com. This book is good for anyone going through grief and loss or just facing a period of darkness in their lives. Last week, I spoke to you on waiting in silence, and I'd like to continue that today. I told you that by nature, I'm not a very silent person. Silence is a part of myself that I had to work very hard to develop. As a minister, as a chaplain, someone who is listening, as a great part of my life and my job. Patients and parishioners have a lot to tell me, and it's my part to listen with unprejudiced ears. And so is it when we're listening to God. God has a lot to tell us about ourselves, and it's our own part to hear, at least for a few moments a day, what He has to say as we open our hearts and our ears and let Him speak. When we develop this ability to hear through silence, we will grow spiritually in indescribable ways. There are many places in our own souls that are not to be seen. They're very hidden, and these things may be totally out of reach of our everyday experiences and awarenesses, places of resentment or unforgiveness, certain hurts and pains that could be influencing our relationships. And through silence and hearing God speak to us, we can always have a place to improve those places. So ultimately, through silence and encounter with our own selves and God, even our relationships may be improved and transformed. Scientific studies have proven that quietude, silence, and calming of our minds actually improve our health in areas of blood pressure, sleep, and the nervous system. So even if we do not feel a need for silence spiritually or interrelationally, building a habit of quiet time into our lives goes a long way into improving the quality of our lives. I see this exercise of silent practice a reward in 3 ways. First, it helps us to turn to God as our strength and away from ourselves and others as the main way we cope with the changeableness of this life. 2, it helps us to face those things within ourselves that we've learned to push down through overactivity, yet they keep reappearing in our human relationships. And 3, it helps us to learn to listen to new concepts within ourselves that may ultimately offer us new ways of responding to life, thus enhancing our creativity. There have been times while practicing silence that I have found myself being guided inwardly to making wise decisions that I would have never made on my own and just listening to my own voice speak. Silence literally brings wisdom from within us. And there is in this silent time 3 things that happens. We turn, we face, and we listen in order to get back on track in life. Every time I think of this idea of turning, I am reminded of a time in the early 90s when Rita, our announcer, and I were invited to Holland to hear a friend make her operatic debut. We had been living in Germany. So we're going to Holland, we think. After about 2 hours, the conductor asked us for our tickets. And after inspecting them, he said, "Ladies, you may not know this, but you're headed to Russia, or what was the former Soviet Union. The next stop will be the very last chance you have to get off and turn around." Wow, we were so startled, and thankfully we jumped off and got on the right train. But it is not an exaggeration to say that many of us think we're headed in one direction that's good, when we may actually be headed in the wrong direction and may not end up where we think we will end up. Through silence and through turning and facing who we really are in the face of God through His Son Jesus, we suddenly realize we're headed in a direction that may hurt us. Listening to a voice other than our own, and in our case, in this story, the conductor, we're able to literally avert a catastrophe, so to speak, jump off and get going in the right direction. Listening is really an invitation to a fuller, deeper, and more satisfying relationship with God. I like to think of it as a gourmet meal rather than a drive-through quick microwave meal. Now, microwave meals are better than no meals, but we are being invited to a 5-course sit-down dinner with the best chef in the world. And all it takes is the desire to go to the party, to make a priority, to listen, and to be open and try new things. I have many people tell me that their lives are boring and unfulfilling. They seek to correct this sometimes by finding new jobs or new people, but not long after they make these changes, they begin to feel those same things all over again. Really, nothing has changed. So their lives are spent in endless search for what they think could be something that would feed their hungry souls. Now, the problem is that our souls were made to eat certain foods, and we're bent on trying to get our nourishment from a food that will never satisfy. As I have said so many times on this program, my favorite quote, "You can never get enough of what you don't really need, because what you don't really need will never satisfy you." My point is that when you have a spiritual meal with God that truly satisfies, then when you go back out into a busy world, you will not be forcing the world to give you what you can only find with God. The world is not capable of meeting your need, and you're not capable of meeting their need when you are yourself living an unfulfilled life. When we love anyone, spouse, friend, or loved one, nothing makes us happier than to know that we're wanted. When someone whom we love meets us at the door and tells us that they were waiting for us to come home, when they give us a big hug and say, "So glad you're home," we feel so loved and appreciated, don't we? Well, the God who created us wants us back. He has waited since we were born for our return, and all He wants for us is our very best. He wants, He waits, and He hugs us in silence, and all of this totally unconditionally. No performance will make that more true. It is in silence, all about just being present, not trying to perform our way into being accepted. For me personally, as one whose entire life has been about performance, I really had to learn this lesson. Have you ever met someone who has such little self-worth that all relationships are eventually broken and no job will ever be good enough? Someone who simply deeply do not know that they're loved? Have you met someone like that? I have. The whole world with this person is always at fault, but it's never themselves. I can tell you that this is a person who feels no one is waiting, no one wants them, and no one loves them. This may play out in a million ways, but at the root, there is a belief that their self-worth is up for grabs. When finding God in silence, that belief is destroyed and a new belief is set in. That person now knows deep inside that God is waiting to speak to them. He does want them, and He assures them of His love for them. Now that is a transformed person. Now here are some ways to begin a journey of silence. Well, this is easy. Invite a friend for a walk and make an agreement with that friend that for part of the walk, you will just walk together in silence. Another way is, instead of hopping out of the bed in the morning, let your first thoughts be, "Good morning, God," and lay there for just a few moments in quiet. I often, very often, in fact, every morning, go get a cup of coffee, and then I just sit in silence for a few moments before doing anything. You know, I found that God doesn't mind having a cup of coffee with me. And then, as we said last week, go very slowly. Just keep your silent time to 5 or 10 minutes and choose your own sacred space. One poet called empty spaces, quote, "the gleam that surrounds the word enclosed in human silence," end of quote. Another great pianist, a German pianist, expressed silence in this way. He says, "The notes that I handle no better than any other pianist, but the pauses between the notes, that is where the art resides." I also think that using scripture, especially the Psalms, really helps when we begin to practice. But there have been beautiful times during silence when I've used very beautiful secular poetry. I find the rhythm of poetry an excellent way to open my heart to God. Well, whatever you decide to do and however you choose, it will work for you. There is no certain way. But do begin this year by practicing time alone with God. Your entire year will be so much richer and fuller, and your life will never be the same. Thank you for joining us today on Journey to Daybreak. Write to Dr. Martha Toney, P.O. Box 160053, Boiling Springs, South Carolina, 29316, or go to marthatoney.com. Please, when you write, feel free to send us your prayer request or just a few words about yourself and your own spiritual journey. We're always interested in hearing from you. And now, keep walking in the light. Till next time.